Dr. Correa, a pleasure to have you on CGTN.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
The world is facing a myriad of challenges. We're talking about climate change, we're talking about inequality, regional conflicts. What do you see as the most pressing challenges facing developing countries right now?
Well, you have mentioned some of them already. Of course, climate change is a major challenge. Access to technology is also a major issue. For instance, now we need to improve the so-called green transition, that developing countries need to access technology in order to do that. And Western countries are very reluctant to share the technologies. We face also what we call a digital divide. In many countries, the use of internet and digital technologies is not sufficient in order to promote development and access, in particular by poor communities. Challenges are also coming from the industrialized world, from the Western countries, in terms of more protectionist policies, disruption of the global value chains. In the United States, in Europe, new industrial policies that affect a lot developing countries' exports. The multilateral system needs to be reinforced, as you mentioned, lack of equity in international relations. So there are many issues that developing countries face, and the South Center is contributing to address these issues and get the multilateral system which is more inclusive and fair. This is not an easy task, but we need to continue doing efforts, and we are sure that in the end, developing countries will be able to build up a better system.
When we talk about the economic development of developing countries, we have to acknowledge that at times more advanced countries have applied trade protectionism, other restrictive measures, and industrial policies to put developing countries in a less advantaged position. What is your message, and how can developing countries work together to tackle this challenge?
Well, the central message is that the right policy would be to cooperate in order for the whole world to be better. But then in many UN declarations, cooperation, solidarity is mentioned. It is proclaimed, but it's not practiced by developed countries. And then what you see is an increase in protectionist measures. Recently, for instance, this increase of tariffs against China's export of electric vehicles. That's a real scandal, 100% tariffs. It's completely against the international trade rules. So this is what is going on. Some developed countries, unfortunately, they're trying to stop developing countries from growing, from catching up technologically, not to help them. They are competing against them and not in favor of real cooperation. So this is a challenge. But at the same time, the weight of developing countries in the world economy has increased enormously in the last 20 years. Today, developing countries account for more than 40% of the global GDP. The South-South trade is perhaps the most important segment of global trade. Research and development has also increased dramatically, to a large extent because of the major improvement, dramatic improvements in China in terms of research and development. So the situation of developing countries is different as compared to 50 years ago, when the declaration on the new international economic order was adopted by the United Nations Assembly. So developing countries now, they have strength. And what we need is to ensure that this is reflected in the multilateral system, and that this actually helps, especially low and middle income countries, to continue the path of development.
The West has claimed that China's overcapacity in new energy vehicles, in lithium batteries, etc., are hurting their businesses. What is your assessment on the matter?
Well, I think that's a completely wrong narrative. It is not addressing the fact that China has made significant progress in these technologies and other fields, so has created the capacity to supply the domestic market as well as export markets. This is just a narrative in order to justify protection measures, as we have just seen with increase of tariffs against a number of products from China, and it has nothing to do with the reality. And not recognizing that competition is what makes economy healthy. So they should be open to competition. Interestingly, when they talk to other countries, they promote competition and open markets. But then in the reality, when their own industries are affected because they are not competitive anymore, then they develop these theories about overcapacity or unfair practices that in fact these developed countries themselves do apply.
You're calling this a double standard.
Oh yes, certainly that's clearly a double standard, of course.
What should China and other developing countries faced with similar situations, similar protective and restrictive measures do in response?
Well, of course, one way is to use the existing institutions like the World Trade Organization. But as you know, there also the United States has tried to undermine in terms of not allowing, for instance, the appellate body to function. They have objected to the appointment of members of the appellate bodies, which has reduced the capacity of the organization to intervene in trade disputes. And of course, there is a need to look for other markets and to continue looking for a multilateral system which is stronger, in which it is a rule-based multilateral system and not a system based on economic power, as these countries are now trying to do.
China, as you know, has been a big advocate for South-South cooperation. China itself, of course, is the biggest developing country and has vowed to really share the fruits of the Chinese modernization with fellow developing countries. Can I ask you how China has been doing just in terms of promoting South-South cooperation?
Well, I think it has had a major impact. I think what has China done in terms of South cooperation has no parallel in recent history, in terms of creating funds, in providing infrastructure, technical assistance. Well, you can see this in many countries. The situation in particular in many African countries has changed dramatically thanks to the cooperation provided by China. Now, South-South cooperation, because of this progress made by China, has become an important tool for development, and this is fully understood now by many developing countries. In the past, there was a lot of reliance on North-South cooperation, but today it's very clear that perhaps the most important tool for development has become South-South cooperation, because we have different understanding. There is respect for national sovereignty and the needs of each country is based on mutual interest. So the principles of South cooperations are very different and very effective in order to promote development which actually addresses the needs of the people in our countries.